All right, everyone, we're on part 12, Where did the Book of Mormon come from? We're glad that you have joined with us once again. And this is very important for us to once again look at the timeline of Rigdon's life. You can see where he had the opportunity and that he was at the right time and the right place to have stolen the manuscript of Solomon Spaulding. So we know he was born February 19th, 1793 at Library, Pennsylvania. He joined the Baptists May 31st, 1817. 1 year later, he moved to North Sewickley on the Connoquenessing River. Say that 3 times. Where he studied from the ministry under the Reverend Andrew Clark, minister of the Providence Regular Baptist Church. On March 1819, he received a preaching license from the Regular Baptists in Pennsylvania. And in April 1820, moved in with Adamson Bentley, an ordained Baptist minister in Warren, Ohio. And before August 24th, 1820, we do know he was ordained a Baptist minister in Warren, Ohio. He married on June 12th, 1820 to Phoebe Brooks. 1821, Alexander Campbell's debate with John Walker took place. It was published. It was read enthusiastically by Adamson Bentley and Sidney Rigdon in 1821. In July of 1821, while traveling through Virginia, Bentley and Rigdon visited Alexander Campbell at Buffalo, future Bethany, West Virginia, and after a day and a night stay, both men were won over to his reform cause. In the summer of 1821, Rigdon and Bentley returned to Warren, Ohio to spread Campbell's reforms among the Baptists of the Western Reserve. In November 1821, he took his family to visit his mother and sister in Pennsylvania, conferred with the First Baptist congregation in Pittsburgh, and received an invitation to become to succeed Reverend John Davis as the fourth pastor there. The plan behind this invitation was initiated and pushed forward by Alexander Campbell, who in 1821 still had some influence in the Redstone Association, to which the First Baptist Church of Pittsburgh belonged. Campbell also used his influence to get Rigdon to accept the offer. And then January 5th, 1822, he ended his ministry in the Warren region with final sermon at Warren. Rigdon and Phoebe, his wife, requested letters of dismission to the Baptist Church at Pittsburgh, which was granted. Now, I do want to say one thing. I'm very grateful, I think, to Cowdery and the two other authors in their book for the mentioning of these dates and the chronology that they were able to set forth. So I want to give a shout out to them. January 28th, 1822, arrived in Pittsburgh to become a minister of the First Baptist Church of Pittsburgh under the jurisdiction of the Redstone Baptist Association. February 6, 1822, officially became the minister of the First Baptist Church. And then this is when we see Reverend John Winter was born in Wellington, England, July 1794. He entered the Theological College of the Baptist Church at Bradford, where he graduated in 1820. His first charge was in South Shields. He married Elizabeth Wilson in 1819, and they with one child came to America in 1822. He preached and taught school at Pittsburgh and preached in various places in Allegheny and Beaver counties, including Rigdon's home church, the Peters Creek Baptist, which he served as pastor in 1825. He wrote much for the religious and secular papers, and you can find that in Bosman, History of Beaver County. So you can see that that does fit the timeline that John Winter later claimed that at this time, in the spring of 1823, he saw a romance of the Bible in Sidney Rigdon's study, and Winter also claimed that Rigdon told him the manuscript had been written by a Presbyterian minister, Spaulding, whose health had failed, brought this to the printer to see if he would pay to publish it. And Winter's daughter, Mary Irvin, later said that her father was informed that Rigdon had gotten it from the printers to read it as a curiosity. Spring of 1823, Rigdon refused to teach the Philadelphia Confession of Faith in Pittsburgh, argued against infant damnation with Pittsburgh schoolteacher and Baptist minister John Winter. Following this winter, soon formed an opposition coalition of 12 to 20 members within Rigdon's congregation. Now here's the interesting thing, is that later on in the Book of Mormon, I think it's Moroni chapter 8 that talks about um, infant, infant, infants. And, you know, I don't have the time to talk about the theological issues in regards to that, but that's something that's very important to talk about. So we can see John Winter, he was present. He bore with Rigdon at his home. Now, the question is, was he accurate? Well, there's a word used, Presbyterian or Congregationalist, and I thought Cowdery Davis and Van said something great in their footnote. Although Solomon Spalding had actually been ordained as a Congregationalist minister, Presbyterians and Congregationalists essentially have one faith, the principal difference being only in the method by which the various church governs themselves. During the time that Spalding lived in Amity, he is known to have regularly attended the Presbyterian church, and he's buried in their churchyard. So what about the bias of Winter? Well, when you look at the timeline of John Winter, Winter is told by Rigdon about the manuscript sometime 1823, sometime 1822 to 1823. And he paid no, as he says, pays no more attention to it until after the Book of Mormon appeared, when he heard that Mr. Spalding's widow recognized in it the writings of her husband, which was 1839, the newspaper of the Boston Recorder. It was communicated to A.G. Kirk at New Brighton, Pennsylvania in 1870 to 1871. And then A.G. communicated it by letter to Robert Patterson Jr. March 23, 1879, 8 years later. And Mary Irvin communicated it by letter to Robert Patterson April 5, 1881. And then Bonsall, the stepson, we don't have the date where he communicated it. But as you can see, this took a lot of years. So, I mean, to say that that's bias when it actually took several years, many years, for it to come to fruition, seems to indicate that kind of bias of why would you lie about this? I mean, what would you gain by it? Was it for riches? Was it for fame, power, sexual lust? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, when we're putting all these people together, so John Winter, he was present, and it's corroborated by the history book, and he was accurate for the most part, except when it comes to Presbyterian or Congregationalists. And the weakness, though, is that it's secondhand testimony, right? All right, so let's continue on. September 1823, the two Pittsburgh Baptist groups appeared in the Redstone Association annual meetings held in Pittsburgh and argued as to which group should be accepted as the official Pittsburgh church. A commission is set up to investigate heresy charges brought against Sidney Rigdon by the Winter faction. October 1823, left Pittsburgh to accompany Alexander Campbell on a trip to Kentucky. October 15th through the 21st, 1823, served as a secretary to Alexander Campbell in his debate with Kentucky Presbyterian William L. McCullough. And in the fall of 1823, the Rigdon led succeeders from First Baptist Church and Walter Scott's Independent Church, informally united, holding joint meetings every Sunday in the Allegheny County Courthouse. The united group was loyal to the tenets of Alexander Campbell. 1823-1825, took up work as a journeyman tanner, eventually as a courier at a Pittsburgh tannery. He worked with his brother-in-law Richard Brooks or William Brooks. Sidney Rigdon may have purchased a part of this business with the proceeds of his June land sale to James Means. August 1st, 1825, J. Harrison Lambton died at age 27, probably at Pittsburgh. If Landon had loaned or given a Spalding manuscript to his friend Rigdon, he was no longer alive to tell of that transaction. Then December 1825, moved out of Pittsburgh and relocated in Bainbridge, Ohio. A new tannery had recently opened at that place, and Rigdon evidently did piecework, leather finishing at home to pay for groceries. July 17, 1827, Silas Ingalls died at age 46, probably near Pittsburgh. If Ingalls had been aware of Lambton or anyone else, having once loaned Rigdon a Spalding manuscript, he was no longer alive to tell of that transaction. Winter of 1828, brings Baptist teachers Darwin Atwater and Zeb Rudolph from northern Portage County to mentor to attend his instructional classes. The two students notice that Rigdon is frequently absent from that place parts of January through March. March of 1828 visits Adamson Bentley and Walter Scott at Warren, Ohio, and accepts Scott's ancient gospel method of evangelizing. April 1828, Adamson Bentley accompanies Sidney Rigdon back to mentor and assisted in implementing the ancient gospel within Grand River Association congregations such as Kirtland and Mentor. Many new converts were brought into the Reformed Baptist ranks. August of 1830, spoke before the annual meeting of the Mahoning Baptist Association, advocating a community of goods be established in the member churches as a major point in the restoration of apostolic Christianity, similar to the experiment he was then conducting with members of his own congregation in Ohio. His suggested plan was demolished by Alexander Campbell's speech denouncing communal living for modern congregations. Now, I want you to notice July 17, 1827, Silas Ingalls died. So it's very important because if you knew of Spalding's manuscript being given to Sidney Rigdon or anything of that nature, well, there's no telling about it anymore. Then there's Amarilla Dunlap. Was she present? Well, she was the niece of Sidney Rigdon's wife, Phoebe. When I was quite a child, she said, I visited Mr. Rigdon's family, 1826, 1827. He married my aunt. They at the time lived in Bainbridge, Ohio. And that is the right time and place when they lived there. Is her statement corroborated? Well, Cowdery et al. Have a picture of Sidney Rigdon's signature in the Bainbridge 1826-1827 tax records. Was she accurate? Well, she does not give many details except his obsession with an unnamed manuscript which Phoebe was willing to burn. And then there is any bias on this. Well, talking about family members, that's kind of hostile testimony, correct? So we got Amarilla Dunlap. She's definitely present. She's definitely corroborated, accurate, and it's biased. And it's not biased. What about Densely Adeline Thompson? Was she present? She said she lived in the family of Sidney Rigdon for several years prior to her marriage in 1827. So was it corroborated? Where her wedding took place in Chardon, Ohio on March 16, 1827. And just to show you where Bainbridge and Chardon are, she served as a nursemaid to the Rigdon children. And Cowdery have a picture of the marriage license and record of marriage for Densely Thompson dated March of 1827. Was it accurate that there was in the family what is now called a writing medium, also several others in adjacent places, and the Mormon Bible was written by 2 or 3 different persons by automatic power which believed was inspiration direct from God? Certainly the details are strange, but if it is the case that he is using and editing the Spalding manuscript, then the picture becomes clearer. Now, here are the others, the 2 or 3, Smith, Cowdery, we just don't know. And the bias, well, I mean, if you see that, is there any, why would she be lying for? So when we put these together, we see Densely Thompson, she is present, it's corroborated, accurate, and we see as the case, there is no bias. What about John C. Bennett? He's a very interesting thing. Was he present? So he joined the LDS Church in the summer of 1840. He was elevated to certain positions such as assistant counselor to the president, spokesman for the president of the church, and Merit Nauvoo. After less than 2 years, he resigned on May 18, 1842, and was drawn fellowship from them on June 18, 1842. Wrote a book called History of the Saints. And was it corroborated? Well, if you look in the History of the Church volumes, there are several references to John C. Bennett having been high up in the LDS Church. Was he accurate? Well, he is indeed accurate as in regards to the Spalding manuscript and the details surrounding it that corroborated what others have said. What about bias? I mean, here's a man that was high up in the LDS hierarchy, so to speak. Toward the front of his book, he does state his aim that he wanted to expose the church. And there are several pages where people do talk about his character and that it was he had a reliable character. So it was definitely a present, corroborated, yep, accurate, certainly. Any bias? Was he doing it for money? Was he doing it for fame, power? Certainly not. What about James Jeffrey? So when we look at him, he says, I want to go ahead and skip a little bit of this. I suppose, notice what he says. I suppose that as Rigdon was so open with me, he had told others the same things. Rigdon, in hours of conversation, told me a number of times there was in the printing office, which he was connected in Ohio, a manuscript of Reverend Spalding, tracing the origin of the Indian race from the lost tribes. So, what about him? Well, was he? Uh, let me go back real quick, if I might. Now he does make some blunders, I think, here. So he says, tracing the origin of the Indian race from the lost tribes of Israel, that this manuscript was in the office for several years. He is familiar with it. That Spalding had wanted it printed, but had not the money to pay for the printing. That he and Rigdon and Joe Smith used to look over the manuscript, read it over Sundays. I mean, that it was connected to in Ohio, the printing office. Well, that's certainly not true. It was Pennsylvania. But other than some of getting the details wrong, was he indeed present for that? I mean, here's a man who lived in St. Louis, just to let you know. So 40 years ago, that would make it 1884, that'd be 1844, the year Joe Smith died. And after Smith died, the leadership was either to be taken over by Brigham Young, the 12, or Sidney Rigdon. Young, the 12, succeeded. This made Rigdon very bitter and angry, and Rigdon threatened to expose the secrets of the church. So, it's the right opportunity to actually say that. Now, here's an interesting thing. This is history of the church. I had an interview with Brother Sidney Rigdon. He said he had power and authority above the 12 apostles and did not consider himself amenable to their counsel. In the evening, the 12 had an interview with Brother Rigdon, who was far from filling an interest of the 12. His license was demanded, which he refused to give up, and said the church had not been led by the Lord for a long time, and he should come out and expose the secrets of the church. Interesting. What secrets do you have to hide? Rigdon was excommunicated from the church on September 8, 1844. Rigdon departed to return to Pittsburgh by going to St. Louis, where he would get on a boat that would take him that direction. It was the perfect opportunity for him to reveal the secrets to someone, and he did. So is it corroborated? Cowdery and others show historical records of St. Louis, a merchant by the name James Jeffrey at that residence in 1845 at another residence. Jedediah M. Grant says Mr. Rigdon, while on his journey from Nauvoo to Pittsburgh, stopped at St. Louis. Collection of facts relative to the course taken by Elder Sidney Rigdon. What about accuracy? Well, Jeffrey gets a detail wrong, such as a printing office with which he was connected in Ohio. Otherwise, his memory is held intact pretty well. What about the bias? What did he have to lie? What did he have to gain from these lies? So, as you can see, I believe that James Jeffrey, when we look at him, he does indeed pass that test, all four tests. So, when we look at the timeline of Spalding's manuscript, so we see that the fall of 1812, Solomon Spalding, wife and daughter, moved from New Salem, Ohio to Pittsburgh, opened a small retail store. November 5th, 1812, Patterson and Hopkins dissolved, replaced by R&J Patterson, Robert and Joseph Patterson. Robert Patterson had a close association with the job office print shop of Butler and Lambden established after 1817. Silas Ingalls was the printer for Patterson and Hopkins as well as for R&J Patterson. Fall of 1812, Spaulding, newly arrived from Ohio, apparently approached Joseph Patterson in regards to having Butler and Lambden print a book he had written. Silas Ingalls told Robert Patterson that a gentleman from the East originally had left a manuscript written in the style of the Bible for publication. Patterson looked at the manuscript and approved it for publication, provided the author pay the cost. Winter of 1813, Solomon Spaulding obtains temporary residence with the Wilson family in Washington County. 1814, Solomon Spaulding's wife and his wife and daughter moved from Pittsburgh to Amity, Washington County, operated a temperance tavern. In October 1816, Solomon Spaulding dies in Amity, Pennsylvania, and is buried there. January 1st, 1818, partnership of Robert and Joseph Patterson suffered bankruptcy and was replaced by the partnership of Robert Patterson and J. Harrison Lambden. Lambden had been a former employee of Robert Patterson in his previous partnership with Mr. Hopkins. The firm operated a bookstore on 4th Street, a bookbindery, and a separate job office print shop under the name of Butler and Lambden. Robert and Joseph Patterson appear to have begun or continued only one division of their former firm at this time, the Robert and Joseph Patterson Steam Paper Mill on the Allegheny River. January 1st, 1823, firm of Patterson and Lambden, along with their Butler and Lambden print shop in Pittsburgh, went into bankruptcy. If a copy of the Spaulding manuscript has survived in the print shop until this date, it was probably then disposed of along with other possessions of the bankrupt firm. 1822, remember that Winter's secondhand testimony would suggest that Rigdon had already had the manuscript. And in 1816 to 1827, Rigdon was re-editing the Spaulding manuscript along the way, incorporating Baptist theology into it. He also incorporated the Old Testament and New Testament scriptures. But we need to continue this, so join me next time as we find out more.